Hi, this is Peter Frampton, and you're listening to Everything Fab Four on Salon.com.
Welcome to Everything Fab Four, a podcast focused on fun and intelligent stories about the Beatles. I'm your host, Ken Womack, music culture columnist for Salon.com and a Beatles scholar and historian. No other band, or popular phenomenon for that matter, has enjoyed the global impact the Beatles have and continue to have more than 50 years later. They are part of our human fabric. They created music that continues to bring people together, and just about everyone has their own Beatles story to tell, some that are surprisingly deep and unexpected. This show seeks to draw those stories out in interesting and insightful ways. Remember, it's a Beatles world, and everyone has a story.
Penny Lane, right? This perfect evocation of a time and a place and a location which you just feel that it comes alive. The fireman, the barber, everything is so beautifully painted in what, like 2.5 minutes? Come on. Just those two songs, Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane. Every endless possibility of popular music is engaged.
Today's guest is celebrated American filmmaker Ken Burns. Renowned for his documentary films and television series, many of which chronicle American history and culture, Burns' work is often produced in association with WETA-TV, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and distributed by PBS. His widely known documentary series include The Civil War, Baseball, Jazz, The War, The National Parks, America's Best Idea, Prohibition, The Roosevelts, the Vietnam War, and country music. He was also executive producer of both The West in 1996 and in 2015, Cancer, the Emperor of All Maladies. Burns' documentaries have earned 2 Academy Award nominations for 1981's Brooklyn Bridge and 1985's The Statue of Liberty, and have won several Emmy Awards, among other honors. His latest documentary, The U.S. and the Holocaust, was produced with longtime collaborators Lynn, Novick, and Sarah Botstein. Welcome, Ken Burns. I understand the Beatles are a subject that you like very much.
Oh my goodness, I love the Beatles, have always loved the Beatles. The first real musical, I was conscious of stuff growing up as a little kid, the Davy Crockett and the Battle of New Orleans and Chubby Checkers, the Twist, but I really fully invested in music as this outsized, out of the house sort of influence with the Beatles, and with I Want to Hold Your Hand. So I've been there from the beginning, and now I've had 2 sets of daughters. One set are all grown up with kids of their own who are Beatles fans, and the other are 17 and 11 and all girls, and they get PhDs in Beatlology. They're phenomenal. Every moment of their lives, they've been Beatles fans.
That's magnificent. And when you say you invested in the Beatles, you literally invested in I Want to Hold Your Hand.
Oh, yeah. No. I think one of the first times I ever spent my own money for music was the Beatles. And I worked at a record store first just for nothing, then for periodically being given a free record. Then I had a part-time job, and I ended up, before I went away to college, the full-time assistant manager of a record store in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I will tell you that the most records I've ever sold on one title was SO 383. We would write it down, which is Abbey Road. Never sold more records of anything else than Abbey Road.
That must have been something to watch that fly off the shelves at that point in your life.
We waited. We knew, the fact that they came so hard and fast and then ended so quickly was just, a huge part of my growing up. There are associations still that when a song finishes on the radio or on Sirius XM Beatle channel, which my daughters insist we're tuned to all the time, I have the muscle memory of what the next song is on the actual vinyl album, and I start to hum it before, of course, the new thing takes over. So it's really imprinted, etched in my hard drive.
What do you think it is? And this is going to be a very tough question in a lot of ways, but I think about it all the time. I teach the Beatles here at Monmouth University. What do you think it is that brings new generations back in droves, to this band that's half dead at this point?
Yeah, sadly half dead. Wish John and George were still here. It's pretty simple. It's a 4-letter word that the FCC allows us to say over the radio, but it's a real tough one for human beings. They are, and I hope that to some extent my work is also about love. And they held to that. They struggled with it. They acknowledged the struggles. They transcended it. And it's the most positive human response. We live in an age of incredible division in which it is in the interests of so many to make the other an other, to make everybody else a them, when in fact there's only us. And for all of those years, 60 years, they have been reminding us, as I've been trying to argue with my stuff, there's only us and there's no them. And they do it with the most important art form there is. It's all the rest of us, in film or in dance or in sculpture or in painting or in theater or literature. We aspire to music. It's the art of the invisible, Wynton Marsalis told me in our film on jazz. And if you think about it, it's the only art form that's invisible and the art form that's the quickest. It works on you. And so when you have a message that is so uniformly about complicated things, people run away from it because they think it's sentimental or sappy or it's hard to talk about, and it is. But the very simple and the very complex answer to your essential question is love. The greatest line in all of rock and roll, in all of music, and next to I love you, that is the love you take is equal to the love you make.
Nicely said. And the transcendence is so significant. And you're right, music, when it connects with people, it's penetrating. My 5-year-old grandson was here last week, so we had all the attendant chaos of, grandchildren in the house. But I had an old baseball game, and I bet you do this too sometimes. I was watching a baseball game from the 1980s just to relive some moments. And I was enjoying it. And he said, I don't want to watch this. I want to watch new baseball. At 5, he knows that he can tell just by watching the screen, with the primitive titles, et cetera, that this is old baseball. But then when we turned on the Beatles later, he just started yelling, Beatles, 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 right? So he didn't see that historical disconnect with the Beatles in the same way that he did with baseball.
We look for those things in our lives that are sort of ever refreshing and yet, constant. And that's a hugely difficult thing to achieve. There are paintings that do that. There are films that do that. There's architecture that does that. And of course, there's music that does that. It is so interesting that pieces from our ancient classical past have had and still have profound effects on us, different music for different people. The same is true of American jazz. There's a timelessness to it, and because of the benefit of mechanical reproduction, that is to say, being able to record something, we have the benefit of being able to hear it as if it's just newly expressed. And I think that's true. The Beatles just fit into a category where most of the things they did live in us in perpetuity and seem as fresh when we hear them again. amazed at being sort of held at gunpoint and forced to listen by my daughters to the Beatles channel, how much each time I get a new appreciation for some song, or I hear the exquisite harmonies that we don't talk about. You know, they're influenced by the Everly Brothers and by other groups in the United States, and the Louvin brothers from country music, and obviously the Isleys from R&B. And the harmonies are so perfect, and the guitar playing is so perfect, and the bass lines and the rhythm of Ringo, and the kind of passion and leadership of John, and the emotional power of Paul. And then just when you think you have one of those two seminal players pinned down, they do something, that's the opposite. You presume that Helter Skelter sounds like a John song, and it's not. You expect I Will and Here, There, and Everywhere to be Paul, and they are. But there are places where John surprises and Paul surprises, in which you feel like for that brief period of togetherness that they all did it. And it's so interesting that we talk about Paul and John, and yet if you were assembling the top 10 Beatles songs, three of them without question, and near the very top, would be three George Harrison songs, in no particular order. Here Comes the Sun, Something, and While My Guitar Gently Weeps. I mean, they are the quintessential Beatles songs, and yet we spend most of our time sort of parsing the genius of Paul and John and Paul together.
That's a great observation, and those three songs make me think of a question that keeps me coming back, at least as a scholar, right? And that is, the Beatles' period of working together as a working professional group of recording artists is roughly June 1962 to their last day in the studio as a foursome in August 1969. That's nothing, right? 7 years. And we have this amazing collection of music. And what strikes me, and what I challenge my students to think about, is that creative arc that starts with a really primitive, poorly drummed version by Pete Best, God love him, all the way to the end, right? Literally the end. And there's just nothing like that in art. How do we explain that one? How do we tackle that? And as an artist, I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts.
So, this is the realm of the unexplainable in a way. Art is, you if you're building a bridge or flying an airplane or taking a science class, 1 and 1 has to equal 2 every single time. But what we want from our faith, what we want from our most important relationships, what we want from our art, what we want from our music is for 1 and 1 to equal 3. And so they did that. This is an impossibly difficult task, to be that kind of transcendent, to be what in fact love is about. And it's there in the earliest stuff. They're interested in that in a way that's sincere. And that's really hard to get in a musical industry in which they become the biggest commodity in that industry. And they stayed true to themselves. And as they mature through those second and third and fourth albums, there's experimentation going on, but they're not straying too far away from this desire that 1 and 1 will equal 3, that the whole will be greater than the sum of the parts. And there's no way you can measure that. You can do the sum of the parts, and you can see the whole, and that mysterious difference between them is what we all search for in life. And then when they hit that creative period that begins, I suppose that ultra creative period that begins with Rubber Soul, but certainly Revolver, and then into Sgt. Pepper And the two most important albums for me are the White Album and Abbey Road. I mean, the White Album takes every form of music practically and does it better. I mean, you're looking for a good folk song? Yup, you've got it. Are you looking for some heavy metal? Yup, you've got it. You're looking for some blues? Are you looking for some rock? Are you looking for some love songs? What are you looking for? And they give it to you. And what it is not a conscious marketing decision. They're satisfying their own curiosity, their own itch, their own search. And search has an open-endedness to it, just as 1 and 1 equaling 3 has a kind of impossibility for us with our ordinary minds to get our minds around that. We just have to, at some point, let go and shake our hands and just say, as I do almost every day that I think about them, and I think about them almost every day, I am so happy to have been living when these things came tumbling out of them. But I'm even more happy as a father to watch first one set of girls do the same thing as I did with the music, and then do it to their children. And then this second set are just, I mean, they're getting their PhDs in the Beatles.
That's incredible. And I like to argue sometimes, and I get your point about how this is the immeasurable. They're the outlier of outliers. They're the uber outlier, right? I try to, when I deal with this in class, I often talk about George Martin and that guiding hand that helped them blow up demography like we've never seen, right? You start out with I Want to Hold Your Hand in the United States and a very narrow, really pretty narrow scope of people who are interested in buying that record, right? Preteens and teens. And then, my gosh, by the time you get to Rubber Soul, your grandmother is interested in My Life. She loves Michelle. By the time you get to Revolver, you've got a single with a kiddie tune on one side, Yellow Submarine, and a song that your crusty dad who's entering or leaving middle age, Eleanor Rigby, is just stunned by, right?
Within those albums, think of also something that owes itself to Gilbert and Sullivan and vaudeville and British music halls, but is one of the most beautiful songs. And I sang it every night to my last two girls, which I've Just Seen a Face. It's a brilliant piece of lyric writing, and it has such an intimate, beautiful sense of longing and search and love that it's great. But I agree with you completely. It's impossible that it should have occurred with these people. And I think we need to speak about George Martin because there is a kind of sense that here's not the babysitter, but maybe here's the governor on the engine. But in fact, it's George that also gives them permission to go places and to experiment in things and say why not, or to bring from his own repertoire the ability to bring in a harpsichord or some Baroque relationship to it. So they are able to escape whatever silo convenience and commerce which wishes to put them in. And that escape is exhilarating. I mean, there's got to be a better word than exhilarating to describe as you follow their musical journey and our musical journey. We grow up with them too.
We'll be back with more from Ken Burns after these messages. We're back with more from Ken Burns. Is there any moment you can think of, as I segue to your great body of work, where you sort of flew without a net like that? You had a sort of basic blueprint, but then you thought, I'm going to let my artistry, I'm going to take it out for a spin.
I hadn't till this very moment, Ken, just sort of thought that maybe the Beatles had given me permission to bite off more than I can chew. I've done that my entire professional life. You weren't supposed to be able to use still photographs to tell an entire story. You certainly couldn't do it for more than an hour after there were a few successful hour-long things. You couldn't certainly do it for 11 and a half hours talking about the Civil War. You couldn't do it for baseball. So each time I've tried to bite off more than I could chew, and I don't know, I can't draw a line completely, but I can't help but wonder whether that that influence in the most important times of my life, from, if you say 62, that I am 9 years old, until 69, their last session together, all of them together, I am, 16 years old. You're made there, and you're made in lots of ways. I chose not to go to a local college, the University of Michigan, where I live, where my father taught, where I could have gone essentially for free. And I instead went to an experimental college, Hampshire College. I first had wanted to be a filmmaker since I was 12, but when I arrived there, all of the teachers sort of challenged the notions of a feature film Hollywood career. And, they call it the industry out there, in favor of something that found your own way. And I adhered. I realized that as much drama could be found in what is and what was than anything the human imagination makes up. As much drama and as much truth, and then married it with a completely unrealized, latent love of history, so that by the time I was 22, I knew what I was supposed to do. And I've just tried to continue to do that in everything. And each time trying to, as I said, bite off a little bit more than I can chew, and then learning to chew it. And I work, and in much the same way, one of the beauties of the group that we're talking about is the love of collaboration, the trust of one another's. And I have, had a group of people that I've been able to work with that have the same kind of intimacy. There's something outside of the industrial production of albums and pop music. The Beatles both master it and transcend it. And we've spent our entire professional life in PBS, outside of the marketplace, where we've got complete and total creative control. And that every film that we put out is a director's cut, or another way to say it, if you don't like it, it's all our fault. We can't blame it on market pressures. And that's the way you want to have it. And then not having a game plan, just wanting to touch and figure out every part of every story that touches our hearts, and I work with extraordinary writers and co-producers and co-directors now, and editors and cinematographers, and it's an intimate group. It's very much a replication of, or you could see that it bears similarities to the group that we're talking about.
Do you find that with each new project, this has always staggered me about writing books, and I guess I need to get over it and just deal with it. But do you find that you almost have to learn how to do each new project? That you can't. There's no blueprint for just walking in and saying, "Okay, we're doing the film again. Here we go."
Yeah, that's the thing. You have to. It's a funny, interesting alchemy there, because you want to be free of formula, and yet you want to have something that is authentically yours. So if we were talking about style, and you can hear an early Beatles and a late Beatles, and you go, "That's the Beatles," right? You know that. So style might be the authentic application of techniques, the authentic. That's the emphasis on that word, that it's genuine. It's not artificial. It's arriving at an end through sincere investigation and search. And so our films are most definitely have a style which people can go, "Oh, I know that must be a Ken Burns film," or something like that. But it is also the sense that every time you start out, you're reinventing the wheel. And you need to do that, because each moment is new. Each moment has a possibility. And if you are permitting the past to swallow the present, or the anxiety about the future to make you forget the present, you don't have the possibility in this moment to grow. And I think they understood that in so many ways. Obviously, their religious and spiritual curiosity, they fed. And yet it did not misdirect their work. It did not imprison their work. It liberated it. And that's true even of George Harrison, who seems to, and I just say seems to, have acquired the most obvious, manifestations of the Hindu religion that they all subjected themselves to. But it's there in everything, One of the albums that we skip over, it was a single, but it ended up on an album, begins: living is easy with eyes closed, misunderstanding all you see. It's getting hard to be someone. These are heavy duty intellectual things that John is always wrestling with, always wrestling with. And what is that mitigated by? Penny Lane, right? This perfect evocation of a time and a place and a location, which you just feel that it comes alive. You don't need to have a music video. You get it. You get it. The fireman, all the barber, everything is so beautifully painted in what, like 2.5 minutes? Come on. Just between just those two songs, Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane, every endless possibility of popular music is engaged.
And it can engage you on so many levels, right? And I believe your films do this too, where you can come in and enjoy the beauty of the music and be happy there, or you can go to
Yeah.
deeper and deeper levels. I mean, Paul's song, like you said, is vivid and colorful, and it is a kind of a mitigating factor for Strawberry Fields. But then you've got Paul breaking off this line: though she feels as if she's in a play, she is anyway.
She is anyway.
Yeah.
Right. Come on. The collaboration permitted two extraordinary artists to be better, right? Just better. And we're the better for it. And all of that stuff, across the universe, uh, Tomorrow Never Knows. I mean, these are deep, deep, deep songs. And even the playful ones have some sense. You've got, when I'm 64, there's nobody that doesn't like that. And you just dismiss it as a kind of simple, fun song. And yet it's all about I mean, I heard that, I go, 64? That is so old. I'm 69 now. I just turned 69 a week ago. And 64 seems like a spring chicken to me.
Yeah. Yeah, well, one of the great Beatles writers and a good friend of this show, Mark Lewison, just turned 64. The great Beatles writer, and you're right. We look at it from such a distance when we first heard Sergeant Pepper, and yet there it is, like this scary monument. And as you said, you've just passed it. I wonder if we could talk about. So you realized at Hampshire, you kind of saw the window into your life's work. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't recognize the person who came into Hampshire and the person who left. It's just really somebody emerged from that crucible of experimentation and having to do it on yourself. There are no grades, and courses are important, but it's really independent study that matters, and it's synthesizing, and it's multidisciplinary. It isn't just finding a rut or following a career path. And just, Robert Penn Warren, the novelist and poet, told me later, careerism is death. And I just thought, right, exactly. And I've never used the word career. I use the word professional life. Right? That's what I do. I have a professional life. A career suggests that you are being forced into some sort of rut that has its expectations and perhaps, a deadening thing. And he riveted me. Careerism is death.
Can you tell us a little about, of course, your new project, which is, um, I've been studying it myself in preparation for our conversation, and it feels like at least on paper, it's teaching about ourselves, but teaching in the best of all possible ways. as in helping to understand or to look closely. Can you tell me about the genesis of the Holocaust project?
Yeah, well, we have been working for 7 years. The we is my co-directors, Sarah Botstein and Lynn Novick, and our principal writer, my colleague, my collaborator for 40 years, Jeffrey Ward, um, on a 3-part, 6.5-hour series, mini-series called The U.S. and the Holocaust. And it is trying to come to terms with that unspeakable event, the nadir of civilization. One of our survivors describes it in the film, and to understand and to provide the opportunity to have a reckoning about what we did and we didn't do and perhaps should have done, what we knew and what we didn't know, and what we should have known. And the United States correctly likes to think of itself as exceptional. But in order to be exceptional, you have to ask the toughest questions of yourself. You have to be harder on yourself than you would expect anyone else to be, to have the kind of self-reflection, something we don't do right now. We bluster and we posture and we hide and we make the other, and we make us, parts of us, them. And we do everything we can to avoid this. And even now we're trying to restrict the teaching of unpleasant aspects of our history. But I can say to you that the United States did more than any other sovereign nation in letting people in. And yet, if we had done 20 times the amount of people we let in, it would not have been enough, and it would be a failure. And we have to understand that the impulses that permitted the worst crime, perhaps the nadir of civilization, are in every country, and particularly in ours. Not particularly, just in ours as well. And that is a kind of nativism and anti-immigrant sentiments, racism, anti-Semitism. They're just around, and they've been there, and they reach a horrific apotheosis in the Holocaust. And that seeing it through the lens of Americans and through the ideals of who we think we are and who we sometimes therefore fail to live up to, and who we actually are at times, as well, is a very difficult thing to do. But it's I will not work on a more important film, let me put it that way, than this one. And I'm as proud of it as anything that we've done, because it is difficult and is one of those things where you can't look away. And now that we are at this point, a real transitional moment historically, where the actual survivors are passing from the scene, and we still have all of the impulses of anti-Semitism and violence and of denying still around us. It's really important, I think, to revisit, permit those survivors to tell their stories, permit our narrative to tell you a top-down version of what the U.S. did. And strangely and paradoxically, it gives you an opportunity, as you were talking about earlier, the many levels of something, to see the Holocaust and how it unfolds in a new way that may be more helpful to people. I've had even scholars say, wow, I had no idea. And ordinary people have been, what? 2 million people were killed before anyone mentioned gas? 2 million Jews were just shot in Poland and Ukraine and all the places we're fighting now, Belarus and Lithuania and other places, just in what is called the Shoah by bullets. That, it was something that was new to me. I knew that took place, but I didn't understand the huge, almost industrial scale before they got to an even worse industrial scale by creating the 6 killing centers in Nazi-occupied Poland that we now know infamously, like Auschwitz and Treblinka and Sobibor and Chelmno and Belzec.
It's stunning, our human capability to create war.
Yeah, there's no bottom. The writer Daniel Mendelsohn says in our film, there's no bottom to the bad things that human beings can do to one another, and that's a terrifying thought. And there's also you're made aware of, because this film echoes with present day things that are going on, rhymes, Mark Twain might say, that the fragility of our institutions, which are now under assault, just basic meat and potato institutions that have never in the entire 240, whatever it is, 6-year history of the United States have not been put into question, are now completely up for grabs, that we have a responsibility to sort of study the past, which is the best teacher we have, to understand where we are and where we may be going, and perhaps head some things off at the pass. The great Holocaust scholar Deborah Lipstadt says in the film, the time to stop a Holocaust is before it begins. So at what point do we just see smoke and not cry fire, right? Even if the fire doesn't happen, even if it can be put out, it's super important for good people everywhere of whatever political persuasion to not buy into the essential lies that made it possible for the National Socialists, the Nazis, to rise to power and to do their hideous acts for the 12 years that they were operational. I mean, look, if you wanted to go to the hippest, coolest, most intellectually and artistically stimulating place in 1930 or 31 or 32, you would do no better than Berlin. If you're interested in music, the most interesting music, in architecture, Bauhaus, in cinema, just amazing things going on, in painting, in intellectual circles, in political arguments and debate. And then it wasn't. Overnight, it wasn't. It just, those who say, well, it can't happen here, it can happen. And the impulses of nativism and anti-immigrant sentiment, the perpetual racism we find in all societies, the anti-Semitism that seems to always be prevalent, ignoring the extraordinary contributions of a tiny group of people who, until 1948, didn't even have a country. It just requires our perpetual study and our perpetual vigilance. When the previous film I made is about the same thing in a way. When the Constitutional Convention was settled and the terrible and good compromises were made to create the United States of America, Benjamin Franklin walks out of what is now Independence Hall, the Pennsylvania Assembly Building, and a woman whose rights were not considered in the Constitution, a leading lady of Philadelphia, Elizabeth Willing Powell, walks up to him and said, "What have you made, Dr. Franklin, a monarchy or a republic?" And he says, "A republic, if you can keep it." And there was never a doubt, even in the Civil War, that republic would not, at least in the northern and western sections, perpetuate. Now, most Americans are fearful of the survival of the country. And I think that if you study the period that we study, and we don't just start in 1933, we wind it back to, America with open immigration in the 1900s, and then, in the 1800s, and then, restrict Chinese in 1882, and then in the early 1920s to begin in 21 and 24 to establish the quota system that favors only Scandinavian and Northern European Protestant, and then lowers the quota for Catholic and countries that have a Jewish population, because of the open immigration that had brought tens of millions of people who have improved our country in innumerable ways. And also, I think, and I don't want to belabor this too much, but the phrase 6 million, that is to say, the number of Jews murdered in the Holocaust by the Nazis, is an impossible number. It has an opacity to it that nobody can possibly comprehend. And so what you have to do, what you're required to do, is to particularize that, understand individual stories of those 6 million. The great writer Daniel Mendelsohn, who I cited earlier, went and discovered 6 of those 6 million, his great uncle and his great aunt and their 4 daughters, who perished when their town in eastern Poland was overrun by the Nazis and murdered because they were Jewish in all sorts of different ways. Only one of them gassed. So it makes it kind of an interesting lesson. But the survivors that we have, you need to particularize it so that you can also appreciate the lost potentiality. What symphonies haven't been written? What gardens haven't been planted? What cures for diseases have not emerged? What beautiful works of art haven't been created? What just normal things? What beautiful children haven't been raised by those missing people? They're an amputated limb that we still feel and still itch and still cause pain to us. Phantom pains though they may be, they are as real as anything, and we are obligated as human beings, animated by the spirit of love, which is the topic we're talking about, exemplified in popular music by the Beatles, to make things better.
Everything Fab Four is presented by Salon.com, the premier news, politics, innovation, and arts website. For more information, visit everythingfab4.com, where you can learn more about our podcast and my latest Beatles-related book, Living the Beatles Legend, The Untold Story of Mal Evans. The Everything Fab Four theme song, Seize the Day, is provided courtesy of Black Rabbit, the high-octane Beatles cover band, an innovative psychedelic rock project from Rockaway Beach, Queens in New York City. Like what you heard today on Everything Fab Four? Be sure to subscribe, give us a rating, and recommend the show to your friends. Plus, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter at EF4 Podcast. Distributed by Salon.com, Everything Fab Four is a Wonderwall production. Remember, it's a Beatles world, and everyone has a story.